Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I spent most of my high school years keeping my head down and getting through each day. My little sister was the bright spot in my life. When she was born, I was maybe 5 or 6, and I remember standing on my tiptoes to peek into her bassinet. She had wrapped her tiny hand around my finger, and something in my chest just clicked into place. That became the memory I held onto when things got hard. Senior year finally rolled around and I was taking advanced placement psychology. The class was interesting. I've been focused on chemistry for college applications, so diving into how the brain worked from a different angle felt refreshing. Our teacher was young and enthusiastic. This was her first time teaching the AP level course, and you could tell she was trying really hard to make it engaging. She'd gone to college for psychology and had worked in a clinical setting before deciding to teach. She talked about the field with genuine passion. After we finished the AP exam in May, she announced we'd be watching a movie as a reward for our hard work. Everyone perked up at that. No more studying, no more stress, just coasting to graduation. We watched Inside Out, which was fine. Kind of juvenile for a bunch of 17-year-olds. But nobody complained about sitting in the dark for 2 hours instead of taking notes. The movie was about emotions and core memories, showing how different experiences shape who we become. Then she dropped the bomb. She told us she'd put together a small project for us to complete. The collective groan was immediate. She promised it wasn't bad and explained that we'd be writing about and illustrating some of our core memories, just like in the movie. She wanted us to pick our best memory and our worst memory. We had to draw them, write about why they mattered to us, and really dig into the emotional significance. She even provided us with a detailed rubric that broke down exactly what she expected. My stomach dropped. I raised my hand and asked if I could do 2 good memories instead. She said no. It needed to be 1 good and 1 bad. That was the whole point of the assignment. She explained that we needed to explore the full range of human emotion and memory, and that psychology required us to look at both positive and negative experiences. She said it would help us understand ourselves better. I pressed further, asking what if someone didn't want to share their worst memory. She reminded us that this was a safe space and that we were all almost adults. Part of psychology was confronting difficult emotions, she said. She added that we'd be submitting these directly to her, not sharing them with the class, so our privacy would be protected. I didn't push back. What was I supposed to say in front of 20 other students? That my worst memory involved being sexually assaulted the year before? That I hadn't even fully processed it myself yet? That I still had nightmares about it? I was also dealing with undiagnosed autism at the time, which meant the idea of just making something up or picking a less traumatic bad memory didn't occur to me. In my brain, she asked for my worst memory, so that's what she'd get. That night, I sat at my desk weighing my options. I could go to my guidance counselor or the department head and explain why this assignment felt inappropriate. I'd had a good relationship with my guidance counselor throughout high school. She'd helped me with college applications and had always been supportive, but it was almost June. I already knew which college I was attending. The acceptance letter had come in March and I'd sent in my deposit weeks ago. Graduation was less than a month away. Did I really want to spend my final days of high school in meetings and arguments when I could be hanging out with friends? My best friend and I had been planning to spend every afternoon together before we headed off to different colleges. I also briefly considered lying, writing about a moderately bad memory instead of the actual worst one. Maybe I could write about the time I broke my arm in middle school or when my dog died. But my brain didn't work that way. The assignment said worst memory. She'd get my worst memory. I decided to just do exactly what she asked and get it over with. I wrote about meeting my baby sister for my best memory. I described standing on my tiptoes, the hospital smell, how her fingers curled around mine. I wrote about how I'd asked my parents if I could hold her and how careful I'd been. I drew a simple picture of a small kid in a bassinet with a tiny hand reaching out. For my worst memory, I wrote about being sexually assaulted the previous year. I kept it factual but detailed enough to meet the rubric requirements. I described where it happened, how I felt during and after, and how it changed the way I moved through the world. I wrote about the panic attacks that followed and how I couldn't tell my parents. I drew an abstract representation of how I felt. Dark colors, disconnected shapes, nothing graphic but definitely unsettling to look at. I kept the assignment hidden in my folder until the very last second before it was due. I didn't want her reading it early and telling me to revise. I checked the rubric multiple times. Points for detailed descriptions, points for emotional depth, points for illustrations that connected to the written component. I hit every single point she asked for. When I handed it in, she took it with a smile and added it to the pile. She thanked everyone for their hard work and reminded us that she'd have them graded by the following week. A week passed. I tried not to think about it. I focused on hanging out with friends and enjoying the final weeks of school. Then she handed back our assignments. Mine had 2 words written at the top in red pen. I'm so sorry. Below that, she'd circled 100%. There were no other marks on the paper. No corrections, no comments about my writing or my drawings, just those 2 words and the perfect score. I looked around the room when other students got their papers back. Everyone was comparing scores. My classmates were calling out that they'd gotten hundreds too. One girl said she'd written about her grandmother's death. Another guy said he'd written about his parents' divorce. Every single one of us got perfect scores. The next day, our teacher stood at the front of the classroom looking uncomfortable. Her usual energy was gone. She apologized to all of us before we started. She said the memory assignment was inappropriate and that she shouldn't have required us to share our worst memories. She acknowledged it was an invasion of our privacy and potentially harmful. She explained that she'd been so excited about connecting the movie to real psychology that she hadn't thought through the implications of forcing teenagers to share trauma. She told us that going forward, if any of us wanted to meet with her privately to talk about anything, her door was open. She looked directly at me when she said that last part. She continued, explaining that she'd already decided that next year she'd still show the movie, but students could choose which memories or personality aspects they wanted to explore. No more mandatory worst memories. Students could write about multiple good memories or explore different aspects of their personalities or even analyze fictional characters if they preferred. The assignment would be about understanding psychology, not forcing disclosure. I felt weird about the whole thing. Guilty, maybe? She seemed like a genuinely nice person who'd made a mistake. I'd essentially forced her hand by giving her exactly what she asked for, knowing it would make her uncomfortable. But I also felt vindicated. She'd learned something. The assignment would be better for future students. Nobody else would have to choose between lying, fighting the system, or sharing their worst trauma for a grade. Years later, my little sister ended up taking AP psychology with the same teacher. She was excited about it because she'd heard the class was interesting and the teacher was nice. When she came home after watching Inside Out, I asked what the assignment was. I was curious to see if the teacher had actually changed things. She told me they got to pick any memories or personality traits they wanted to write about. The teacher said they could do all good ones if they wanted, or mix it up however felt right. She'd specifically told the class that the goal was to understand how memories shape us, not to force anyone to relive painful experiences. I smiled at that and told her that sounded much better. She agreed and said she was going to write about when we went to the beach last summer, and that time she bombed her math test. Safe memories. Age-appropriate memories. Memories she actually wanted to share. She worked on the assignment at the kitchen table that week, and I watched her draw and write with enthusiasm. She wasn't stressed or anxious about it. It was just a normal school project, exactly how it should have been from the start. I met my friend back in college and we stayed close even after graduation. She was always someone I could count on, and we'd hang out regularly, grab coffee, talk about life. When she got pregnant, I was supportive. Her relationship with the father didn't work out and she ended up raising her daughter on her own. I admired her strength and wanted to be there for her as a friend. For the first couple of years, things were fine. Her daughter was a baby, then a toddler, and while she had her moments like any kid, it wasn't too bad. But over time, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. The kid was getting older, but certain behaviors weren't changing. She was 4 now and still breastfeeding. I'm not talking about once in a while. I'm talking about multiple times a day, every single time we hung out. My friend wasn't even producing milk anymore. It was purely for comfort, but the kid would demand it constantly, crying and tugging at her mother's shirt until she gave in. Then, there was the potty training issue, or rather, the lack of it. Sometimes the kid would use the bathroom on her own. Other times, she'd just go in her pants. My friend would sigh, clean it up, and act like it was no big deal. The kid didn't have any developmental issues or medical problems. She just wasn't being taught properly. On top of all that, my friend had given her a phone. A 4-year-old with a phone. The kid was glued to it every second, watching videos at full volume, scrolling through apps like a tiny zombie. I never said anything. It wasn't my kid. It wasn't my place. I figured my friend was doing the best she could, and I didn't want to make things harder for her. But the real problem wasn't just how the kid behaved, it was how that behavior started affecting me. The kid had gotten really attached to me over the years. Whenever we hung out, she'd want to sit next to me, show me things on her phone, ask me questions. At first, it was kind of sweet, but then she started wanting my stuff. My laptop, my smartwatch, my glasses. Things I needed and couldn't afford to replace if they got broken. My friend and I were at a park one afternoon. We were sitting on a bench, talking, while her daughter played on the swings. Well, she was supposed to be playing. Instead, she kept running back to us, demanding things. First, she wanted my friend's phone. My friend handed it over without hesitation. Then she wanted juice. My friend gave her juice. Then she wanted a snack. My friend gave her a snack. Then the kid looked at me and pointed at my smartwatch. She said she wanted it. I told her no and explained she couldn't have it. Her face scrunched up immediately. She insisted louder that she wanted it. I tried to explain again that it wasn't a toy and she couldn't play with it. She started whining, that high-pitched noise that drills into your skull. My friend looked over but didn't say anything. The kid grabbed at my wrist, trying to pull the watch off. I told her to stop and repeated that she couldn't have it. Her voice got louder and shriller. People nearby started looking over. My friend finally stepped in and told her daughter that it was my watch and she couldn't have it. The kid screamed back that she wanted it anyway. She threw herself on the ground and started screaming. Not just crying, full-on screaming like someone was hurting her. People were staring now, some of them giving me dirty looks like I'd done something terrible. My friend knelt down trying to calm her, but the kid just kept screaming, kicking her legs, flailing her arms. It went on for 10 minutes. 10 solid minutes of hysterical crying until my friend finally promised she'd get her ice cream later, if she calmed down. The kid stopped immediately, sniffled a few times, and went back to her phone like nothing had happened. I felt exhausted, humiliated, angry. A week later, my friend asked if I could watch her daughter for a few minutes while she ran to her car to grab something she'd forgotten. I didn't want to, but I said yes because I didn't know how to say no without explaining why. The kid and I were alone for maybe 3 minutes. I was sitting on the couch, and she was on the floor with her phone. Then she looked up at me and pointed at my glasses. She said she wanted them. I was wearing them. I told her no and explained I needed them to see. She insisted she wanted them. I apologized but said she couldn't have them. Her face turned red. She stood up and reached for my face. I leaned back and told her to stop. She started crying. Not just crying, screaming. The same gut-wrenching, ear-splitting screams from the park. I didn't touch her. I didn't even raise my voice. I just kept saying no, but she acted like I was torturing her. People walking by outside stopped and stared through the window. One person looked like they were considering calling someone. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to disappear. My friend came back 30 seconds later, saw her daughter on the floor screaming, and immediately scooped her up. She asked what happened. I explained that her daughter wanted my glasses and I said no. My friend rocked her daughter, who was still wailing, and didn't say anything to me. She just looked tired, defeated. I went home that night and barely slept. I kept replaying the whole thing in my head. The screaming, the stares, the way my friend didn't even seem surprised. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was every time we hung out now. I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I cared about my friend, but being around her kid was making me miserable. The constant tantrums, the lack of boundaries, the way the kid was allowed to act however she wanted. I texted my friend the next day and asked if we could talk. We met up for coffee, just the two of us. I was nervous. I didn't want to hurt her, but I couldn't keep pretending this was okay. I told her I needed to talk about something and asked her not to take it the wrong way. She seemed uncertain but said, okay. I explained that I loved her and she was one of my best friends, but I couldn't keep hanging out when her daughter was around. Her face fell. She asked why. I told her it was because her daughter couldn't take no for an answer, and it was putting me in impossible situations. I explained that every time I said no to her, she had a meltdown and people thought I'd done something wrong. I said I couldn't keep dealing with that. My friend said her daughter was just a kid and didn't understand. I replied that she was 4 and old enough to understand the word no. I pointed out that she didn't have to understand it because my friend gave her whatever she wanted to stop the crying. My friend looked down at her coffee and said she was doing the best she could. I told her I knew that and I wasn't judging her. But I couldn't keep doing this. She didn't argue. She just nodded, tears in her eyes, and we sat in silence for a while. We still talk sometimes, but we don't hang out like we used to. It sucks. I miss my friend. But I don't miss the chaos. I don't miss the tantrums. And I don't miss feeling like a villain every time I set a boundary. I found my turtle years ago when he was about the size of my palm, and now he's grown into this massive guy who weighs close to 40 pounds. He's an African spurred tortoise, and his shell is rock solid. Most days when the weather's nice, I let him roam around my fenced backyard. He loves munching on the grass and basking in the sun. The fence is tall enough that he can't get out, and honestly, he's never shown much interest in escaping anyway. He just waddles around, eats, and enjoys life. My neighbor 2 houses down has this kid who's maybe 10 or 11 years old. The kind of kid who never hears the word no. I've seen him throwing rocks at cars, screaming at his mother in the driveway, and generally acting like the world owes him everything. His mother is cut from the same cloth. She's one of those people who thinks her precious angel can do no wrong. And if anyone suggests otherwise, they're the problem. The other day, I was inside making lunch when I heard this blood-curdling scream from my backyard. I dropped everything and ran outside to find this kid hopping around on one foot, wailing like someone had chopped his leg off. My turtle was just sitting there a few feet away, minding his own business like always. The kid's mother came into my yard through the side gate, which I didn't even realize was unlocked. She immediately demanded to know what I had done to her son. I told her I hadn't done anything and had just gotten out there myself. Her son was crying so hard he could barely talk, but he managed to gasp out something about the stupid turtle hurting him. I pointed out that the turtle didn't hurt anyone and that he doesn't even move that fast. I looked at the kid's foot. It was already starting to swell up pretty bad, turning purple around the toes. She went off about how my dangerous animal had attacked her baby and told me to look at his foot. I explained that it was a tortoise that eats grass and didn't attack anyone. The kid finally caught his breath enough to speak in full sentences. He admitted that he had kicked it and that it hurt him. His mother's face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. She insisted he didn't mean it and that he was just a child. She said that thing shouldn't be in my yard where kids can get to it. I reminded her that this was my yard, my private property, and that her son shouldn't be in here at all. She threatened to sue me and said that my monster had broken her son's foot. I told her straight up that her son kicked my turtle and that it wasn't my problem. She grabbed her kid's hand and started dragging him back toward the gate, talking about lawyers and dangerous animals. The kid was limping badly, still crying. Maybe they'd take him to urgent care. Maybe they'd realize kicking a turtle was a stupid idea, and we'd all move on with our lives. About an hour later, I was back in the kitchen when I heard my other neighbor's lawnmower shut off suddenly. Then I heard shouting. I looked out the window and saw her standing in my backyard again, but this time she had something in her hand that caught the sunlight. A kitchen knife. I flew out the back door. My turtle was near the fence, and she was walking straight toward him with the knife raised up over her head. I shouted and asked what she was doing. She yelled back that the thing had hurt her son and needed to be put down. I screamed at her to get away from him. She didn't even turn around. She just kept walking toward my turtle, who had pulled his head into his shell because even he could sense something was wrong. I didn't think. I just ran and shoved her as hard as I could. She went down on the grass, the knife flying out of her hand and landing a few feet away. She hit the ground hard and immediately started screaming about assault. She kept yelling that I had pushed her and that she was calling the police, saying I had attacked her. My neighbor from next door was standing at the fence line with his phone already out. He said that he had already called the police and that he saw everything. Her face went white. She scrambled to her feet and tried to grab the knife, but I got to it first and kicked it farther away. She went into a full rant about how the animal was dangerous and had broken her son's foot. She insisted she had every right to protect her family. I shot back and asked if she meant by breaking into my yard and trying to stab my pet. My neighbor chimed in and told her the police were on their way and that she should probably stay right where she was. She looked between us, then at the knife on the ground, then back at us. For a second I thought she might actually run, but she just stood there fuming. The cops showed up fast. 2 squad cars pulled up within maybe 5 minutes. One officer went straight to the knife and bagged it, while the others started taking statements. I explained everything from the beginning. The kid jumping my fence, kicking my turtle, hurting himself, and then his mother coming back with a weapon to kill my animal. My neighbor backed up every word and said he saw her walk into my yard with a knife raised and saw me push her away from the turtle. She tried to spin it like she was defending her injured child from a vicious animal, but the officers weren't buying it. One officer told her that she had entered someone else's property with a weapon and attempted to harm their animal. He said that wasn't self-defense. She protested that the turtle had hurt her son. The officer explained that her son had trespassed and kicked the animal and that the animal didn't attack him. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at her standing there, still trying to argue that she was the victim, and I didn't hesitate. I said yes and that I wanted to press charges for trespassing, attempted animal cruelty, and whatever else applied. They arrested her right there in my backyard, handcuffed her, and walked her to the squad car while she screamed about how unfair it was and how she was going to sue everyone. My turtle poked his head back out of his shell and went back to eating grass like nothing had happened. The neighbor came over after the cops left. He asked if the turtle was okay. I told him yeah, that the shell was too tough for that kid to have done any damage. I thanked him for calling the police. He said no problem, and that the whole thing was insane. He asked who tries to stab a turtle. I got a restraining order the following week. I've been doing maintenance at this fast food place when everything went sideways. When I first got hired, the general manager sat me down and made me an offer. She told me straight up that maintenance was tough at our location. The building was old and things broke constantly. We were only approved for 2 maintenance people, and one of them was the owner's son. She admitted, just between us, that he wasn't any good at the job, but we couldn't fire him for obvious reasons. So she proposed something. I would do what needed to be done, work the hours necessary to keep the place running, and she'd approve all my overtime, every single hour. I asked if she was sure about that deal. She said absolutely. She needed someone she could count on. It was just a handshake agreement, nothing in writing. But she kept her word every single week, and I kept the place running smooth. Our location was the oldest one the owner had, built back in the 50s, so something was always breaking down. The walk-in cooler, the fryers, the ice machine, the plumbing, you name it, I fixed it. The other maintenance guy, the owner's son, would show up maybe twice a week. He'd walk around with a clipboard, pretend to check things, then disappear for hours. Everyone knew he was useless, but nobody could say anything. So I picked up all the slack. Things worked out fine for almost 2 years. During health inspections, our store consistently scored the highest out of all the owner's locations. The general manager was happy, the owner was happy, and I was making good money with all the overtime. Then she quit. The new general manager started on a Monday. I showed up for my shift that morning, and she called me into the office before I could even clock in. She told me we needed to talk about my hours, specifically that I was working way too much overtime and it was going to stop immediately. 40 hours a week, that's it. I explained that the previous manager and I had an agreement. I worked whatever hours were needed to maintain the building and she approved the overtime. She said she wasn't the previous manager and she wasn't approving overtime anymore. 40 hours meant 40 hours. I pointed out that the building was 70 years old. Things broke constantly. If I was only there 40 hours a week, stuff wasn't going to get fixed. She told me I'd need to manage my time better. 40 hours. That was final. I sat there for a second, then asked if she could send that to me in writing. She seemed confused and asked me to repeat that. I said I just wanted to make sure we were clear on the new policy. I wanted an email confirming I was limited to 40 hours and she wouldn't approve any overtime. She looked annoyed but agreed and pulled up her email. I got the email 10 minutes later. It was short and direct. No overtime approved under any circumstances. 40 hours maximum. So that's exactly what I did. I started tracking my hours down to the minute. The second I hit 40 hours, I clocked out, turned off the work phone, and went home. Usually happened by Wednesday or Thursday. First week under the new policy, I hit my 40 hours on Wednesday afternoon. Turned off the phone, went home, enjoyed my long weekend. On Monday morning when I came back, the manager was furious. She demanded to know where I'd been. The walk-in cooler had stopped working Thursday night. I told her I was off. I'd hit my 40 hours Wednesday. She said I needed to answer the phone when they called. I explained that the work phone stayed at the restaurant when I was off the clock. She was the one who said 40 hours only. She complained that they'd had to throw out thousands of dollars of frozen product. I just shrugged and reminded her that she was the one who set the hour limit. The second week, same thing happened. Hit 40 hours Thursday morning. The fryers stopped heating Thursday afternoon. They couldn't make chicken, fries, or anything fried. Pretty much half the menu was unavailable all weekend. Week 3 was when things really fell apart. I'd already maxed my hours by Tuesday because I'd spent Monday fixing the ice machine. Thursday morning, a health inspector showed up unannounced. The bathrooms were a mess because I hadn't been there to fix the plumbing backup. The grease trap was overflowing. One of the coolers had a broken door seal. The floor drains were clogged. They red tagged the store. Shut it down completely until everything was fixed. The owner called me into his office the next day. He was livid. He demanded to know what the hell had happened. We'd never failed an inspection before. I explained that I wasn't there to fix anything. I'd already worked my 40 hours. He asked what I meant by 40 hours. I'd always worked 60 or 70. I told him the new manager had implemented a strict 40-hour policy. No overtime approved under any circumstances. He said that was ridiculous. I agreed but explained that's what she told me. I had it in writing if he wanted to see it. He told me to show him. I pulled up the email on my phone and handed it over. He read it twice, his face getting redder each time. He asked who approved this policy change. I told him it was his new general manager. He was quiet for a minute, then asked about the old manager and whether she'd approved my overtime. I confirmed she had. Every week. We'd had a verbal agreement from day one. He asked why I didn't come to him when this changed. I said with respect that I did exactly what the general manager told me to do. 40 hours, no overtime. That's what I gave her. He picked up his phone and made a call. 5 minutes later, the new general manager was in the office. He didn't yell, didn't raise his voice, just showed her the email and asked her to explain. She tried to justify it with some corporate efficiency nonsense, but he cut her off. He fired her on the spot and told her to clean out her desk. She started to argue, but he wasn't having it. Security walked her out 20 minutes later. The owner turned back to me and said my agreement with the previous manager was now official. It was going in my contract. I would work whatever hours were needed. He'd approve all overtime. No questions asked. I thanked him and said I appreciated it. He just told me to keep his stores running like I did before. Things went back to normal after that. The owner even hired a second competent maintenance person to help out since his son clearly wasn't cutting it. The store reopened a week later after I fixed everything the inspector flagged. The owner's son actually got reassigned to work the register at another location. Guess even family connections have their limits. I met my husband when I was 23. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and we always knew we wanted kids. What we didn't expect was how fast they'd arrive. Our first was born a year after the wedding. Then, just when we were getting the hang of being parents to one, I got pregnant again. 2 under 2. People told us we were brave. We just laughed it off. The third pregnancy was a surprise. I was on birth control, but life had other plans. During the delivery, something went wrong. I started bleeding heavily. The doctors worked fast and both the baby and I made it through, but they told me afterwards that another pregnancy could be dangerous, possibly fatal. My doctor sat me down after the delivery and explained that my uterus had torn during labor. They'd repaired it, but the damage meant carrying another baby could kill me. So that was that. 3 kids, and my body was done. The recovery was brutal. Between healing from the complications and taking care of a newborn while managing 2 toddlers, I barely slept for weeks. My husband helped when he could, but he worked long hours. Most days, it was just me and the kids. I had help from my mom for the first 2 weeks, but then she had to go back to her own life. After that, I was on my own during the day. Once I felt strong enough, I started taking them out again. Target runs, grocery shopping, quick trips to the park. I needed to get out of the house, and they needed fresh air. Plus, staying home all day with 3 tiny humans felt like slowly losing my mind. People always had something to say. Old men would chuckle and tell me I had my hands full. Moms would give me sympathetic smiles and share their own horror stories. Cashiers would joke about how I must be super mom. I learned to smile and nod and keep moving. But every once in a while, someone would cross a line. There was the woman at the pharmacy who asked if they all had the same dad. The guy at the gas station who said I looked too young to have so many kids and questioned whether I could actually afford them. The teenage clerk at the dollar store who loudly asked her co-worker if some people just didn't believe in birth control. Each comment stung a little, but I kept my mouth shut. Getting into arguments with strangers wasn't worth the energy. I just wanted to finish my shopping and go home. That day at Walmart started out normal. It was a Wednesday afternoon around 2 p.m. I loaded everyone up, made a list, and headed out. The 4-year-old was in a good mood, chattering about the cartoon he watched that morning. The 2-year-old was obsessed with the cart, gripping the sides and pretending to steer. The baby was strapped to my chest in the carrier, fast asleep. I grabbed what I needed: diapers, wipes, milk, bread, some frozen meals because cooking dinner from scratch wasn't happening. The usual. My total came to $63.42. The 4-year-old asked for a toy from the display near the register. I said no. He whined for about 30 seconds, then moved on. The 2-year-old tried to grab everything we passed, so I kept redirecting her little hands back to the cart. She managed to snag a pack of gum at one point, and I had to pry it out of her sticky fingers. Checkout went smooth. I paid, bagged everything myself because the cashier was busy scanning the next customer, and started toward the exit. The automatic doors were just ahead. I could see my car in the parking lot, almost done. That's when she appeared. An older woman, probably in her 70s, with white curly hair and a bright floral shirt. She stepped directly in front of my cart, blocking my path. I stopped short to avoid running into her. Her eyes went wide when she looked at the kids. She exclaimed loudly about how many babies I had with me. I gave her a polite smile, the kind I perfected over the past 4 years. The kind that said, "Yes, I know, please let me leave now." But she wasn't done. She asked me if I knew what caused pregnancy. I froze. My brain took a second to catch up with what she'd just said. Did she really just ask me that? In the middle of Walmart? In front of my kids? She stood there grinning like she'd just told the funniest joke in the world. Waiting for me to laugh along. Waiting for me to be embarrassed. A couple of other shoppers nearby slowed down, watching to see what would happen. I stared at her. My hands tightened on the cart. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. All those months of biting my tongue, of ignoring rude comments, of pretending I didn't hear the judgment in people's voices. It all bubbled up at once, but then I stopped. I took a breath and I decided to play a different game. I let my expression soften. I arranged my face into something sad, something tragic. I even let my eyes get a little watery. I told her I did know and that it was no longer a problem since I actually couldn't have any more after this last one. I paused, let the words hang in the air, watched her process what I just said. Her smile disappeared. The color drained out of her face. She looked horrified. Her mouth opened like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. One of the other shoppers looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't been listening. I tilted my head slightly, keeping that sad, brave look on my face, like I was a wounded soldier accepting my fate. She stammered for a second, then finally managed to tell me my kids were adorable. I thanked her quietly. I even added that I was grateful for the 3 I had. That seemed to make her feel worse. She stepped aside quickly, practically tripping over her own feet to get out of my way. I pushed the cart forward, walked through the automatic doors, and headed to my car. The 4-year-old asked why the lady looked so scared. I told him some people just make silly faces sometimes. He accepted that answer and went back to talking about his cartoon. The 2-year-old had already forgotten the whole thing and was trying to unbuckle herself from the cart seat. I loaded the groceries into the trunk, buckled everyone into their car seats, and sat in the driver's seat for a minute before starting the engine. My hands were shaking a little, not from anger, from satisfaction. I didn't owe that woman my medical history. I didn't owe her an explanation for my family. But watching her realize she'd stepped in it, watching her scramble to backtrack, watching her walk away, ashamed of herself, that felt good. I thought about all the other times people had made comments, all the times I just smiled and moved on. Maybe I should have been doing this all along. I started the car and drove home. The 2-year-old fell asleep before we even left the parking lot. The baby stayed asleep the whole ride. The 4-year-old hummed to himself in the back seat. When we got home, my husband was already there. He'd gotten off work early. He helped me carry the groceries inside and asked how my day went. I told him about the woman at Walmart. He laughed so hard he had to sit down. He said he wished he'd been there to see her face. I put the groceries away while he got the kids settled. The 4-year-old ran off to play with his toys. The 2-year-old woke up cranky and demanded a snack. The baby slept through everything. Just another regular day. Except this time, I got the last word. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.